later. Our first speaker today is Katie Clements, who is joining us from England, who's going to be presenting on her topic, do you need to change the functions of a space to make it successful? So with that, I'll hand it over to Katie to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Let me just work out. Okay, so hi, I'm Katie, and if you don't know me from being in my small group or from the talent show, I live in Bristol. I'm just trying to work out how to do my Zoom. Hang on. Can someone tell me if they see the slides?
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna start this off. Okay. So basically, I live in Bristol in England, and this week we've talked a lot about deindustrialization in the US and what to do with derelict spaces. And I live in a city where I kind of felt there's a lot of similarities there. I wanted to share my take on 2 regeneration efforts in the center of my city, in the harbour side. And these are 2 spaces, 7-8 years ago, both of them derelict. And now both of them I love. But what's gone on in these 2 spaces has been very different. The kind of drivers of the change there very different. And the outcome of both spaces is very different. So I thought it'd be interesting to share. First though, what is Bristol and where is it? So this is Bristol. This is where I live. This is in the United Kingdom. And here's some, why might you know Bristol, or what do I think of Bristol as? Got some photos here. So first thing, Suspension Bridge, it's a landmark. There's balloons there because there is a balloon festival, but that's quite an iconic, when you visualize Bristol, that's what most people would think. We've talked a lot this week, we've mentioned Basie. So luckily, I'm very lucky that Basie is from Bristol. So there's lots of artwork from him, always kind of unauthorized, but very thought-provoking. Other things about Bristol would be it's kind of its young population, and it's like willingness to be kind of very politically involved. So there's a photo kind of on the left in the middle, that's Greta Thunberg. And this was just before kind of the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Teenagers in the city and one organization run by them and by those kind of 3 girls in the front arranged for her to come and for a climate protest on our college green, which is kind of where all the protests happen. And the authorities, the police were very much, this is, there's people coming from, they were very concerned there was going to be crushing. They were worried that we wouldn't be able to organize it. They were worried that they're kind of warning people not to come. But actually, you know, they had to turn around on what they said because it was really good. And it did rain a lot, but everyone kind of there. And it was the first time I felt kind of strong Bristolian spirit. So that's kind of positives, Bristol. But it's also, you know, Bristol has to contend with a lot of things. So it's a city that's built on trade, right? It's built on the trade of goods, but it's also built on the trade of people. So as a city, it's like we're trying to decide, how do you want to remember like the figures of the city's past? And these are people that are on all of the schools, they're like on all of the named after concert halls, their names are everywhere. So I added a photo of, that's Colston statue. I think this definitely made national news. It might have made international news as well. And that was it being pulled down sort of mid last year. Yeah, I'll move on for now and get back to kind of the topic of the conversation, but that is Bristol and where we're kind of at. So I said that it was a city built on trade. The reason why is quite interesting. So on the left, that's the Bristol Channel, and it has the 2nd largest tidal range in the world. So it meant historically loads of boats could come in and out on the currents quite easily. And so the city like developed as a port. But then it got to the point in the 18th century where the boats were too big, the water is really like muddy, and things were getting damaged. So what they did was change what Bristol looked like and built, I'm gonna have to explain as well, but they built a floating harbour, and the original River Avon was redirected to where it says the new cut. And then instead there were these kind of dams and pump systems that were put in place. And then there would always be a bit of the harbour that was like floating where the ships could be. And the bit that's in yellow, that's an area that I want to talk about. And it's where the pumps were. And essentially what the floating harbour did was it allowed the Bristol to grow more. But didn't last very long, because the topic of what I want to say is regeneration. So it obviously couldn't last forever. Oh, here we go. This are the pumps that they use so on that yellow space, these are the pumps that used to filter out all of the sediment in what was like a big bit of stagnant water. So what happened after the floating harbour reached its capacity, it just couldn't compete with the northern ports. And this is a similar trend, I think, to what happened in the US with its industry. It just lacked competitiveness. So things moved away. After World War II, the warehouses that weren't bombed, they were just kind of left derelict. And a lot of it looked like this. This photo here is under Full Yard. This is that yellow space where the pumps are. Everything in Bristol Harborside either looked like this or worse. This is a space that still kind of had a functional use because it was still pumping sediment out. But things were very derelict and people were moving away. The council had to decide, what do we do with all of this land? And they were going to turn all of this. They were going to turn all of this into a motorway, but they didn't. Instead, they decided that they would redevelop it for the people and build lots and lots of apartments. Look, that these big apartments were as a result of stripping away what was there, getting rid of all the toxic waste, stripping away anything that had any relation to the industry, all of the warehouses and everything, and building these big complexes of apartments that, I mean, there was no community participation really, and a lot of the local population around the floating harbour felt that they were kind of ugly. I leave my opinion on that. I'm not sure. So that was one strategy, redeveloping the harbour, was to strip everything back and was to put these huge apartment complexes. But that wasn't what happened everywhere. A group of ex-engineers, very interested in where those pumps were that were removing the sediment, they essentially formed something called the Under Full Yard Trust. And they applied for national lottery funding. They made a bit of a deal with the council. And essentially what they did was take a derelict space and they, I'm not sure how to say it, they went back and they turned it into what it was. So this is Under Full Yard now, where the top right, you can see the big hydraulic pump. On the bottom left, there's the what it is. And basically now it's a working boatyard. There's rope maker, blacksmith, there's everything kind of there, that maritime themed little units, and it's completely self-sufficient because the rent from all these local craftspeople, it just pays for it. And so you've got a space that was derelict and is now what it kind of replenished to what it was. And on top of that, you get kind of 8 to 10-year-olds go there on school trips and they're learning all about hydraulics, and that's pretty cool. It's building a sense of connection that the public couldn't go to this place before. It was sort of very shut off. So for somewhere that's kind of responsible for the functioning of the city, the fact that it hasn't just been all cleared back and built new kind of funky apartments, I think is fundamental to why it's like popular now and successful. So I guess what I was saying there is maybe don't clear everything away and put new stuff on, but that is not always my opinion. which I'm going to talk about now, because not everywhere on the hub side is an underfloor yard. Not everywhere has that genuine like functional use. And I think underfloor yard has only not been turned into apartments because it has to be protected because of the pumps that are there. So it's not really an option. You've got places like this elsewhere in my city, further along. How do I? Places like this, right? This is Whopping Wharf. It's further along, closer to the center of the city. Basically, it was a timber yard. Then it was a jail. Then it was a car park, and it was full of toxic waste. And it just didn't have the options that underfloor yard had. You couldn't make it into some big heritage place because really what was there, not a lot. And in terms of attracting finance, you're really going to struggle to do much more than property because there was big costs involved with getting rid of all of the toxic waste. So what they did here was a private developers, so outside money came in, and with a lot of community participation, which is why I think it wasn't a complete disaster. With a lot of community participation, a lot of residents were very vocal about the development of this due to those apartments that I showed you before. Because they were so vocal, it meant that what they made was this. And I think we've talked about I think with Sam, we talked a bit about it in one of the discussion groups, but basically, it is apartments, though these kind of started there are only 200 of them. But what is quite cool are all of these cargo containers, and in every one is an independent restaurant or business. A lot of them are ethical values, which is quite reflective of the young professional people that live there. And to be honest, it's only really young professional people that can afford to live in this development. It's won loads of awards in the UK. It looks quite similar to certain things that they've done in New York, I think. And yeah, it's won lots of awards. I'm now thinking after Neil Patel's talk whether this is all like a simulation because it was privately. Is this all one big kind of marketing thing? But then on the other side of that, it's really used. It's really popular, and there is a lot of choice there. So I'm not sure. The critics of Whopping Wharf would say the apartments are not affordable. The people south of the river here, their average income is not enough for a mortgage for one of these for the cheapest of these apartments. And so that is sort of where you can come at it from a critical point of view. But I just want to share one last thing that's quite interesting about this place. And that is what it's done for accessibility for the city. So the orange here, that is Whopping Wharf, the kind of orange shaded in bit. The people who live below the River Avon, that's kind of labelled, and it says like Lucky Lane and St Paul's Church. That is Southville. It's a lower income neighbourhood. And if you wanted to go from there, walk from there to the Central Business District, which is in the top left-hand corner, you'd have to go on the red, cross Gal Ferry Bridge, go around on the blue, Wapping Road, all the way around, and then cross over towards Princes Street. So with the development of Whopping Wharf, what the residents of that place can now do is they can go straight across Gal Ferry Bridge, down the steps, and across and join Wapping Road further along. It doesn't look like a lot in this image, but it cuts 15 minutes off, and it's a much nicer route. The route before is it's a really busy road, and it's kind of blocked off with a big wall as well. So in terms of how this space is able to benefit the local community, I'd say it's definitely the generation of a new place. This was a place that wasn't here before. The people that are living here now weren't living in this area before. But in terms of who uses the space, I would say that a lot of people in Bristol do use the space because it's so accessible, and because a lot of it is outdoor seating and restaurants, and the prices of the food there is not any different to anywhere else. And so though you might not be able to live in Whopping Wharf, I do think it's there's a reason why it's popular. It is kind of accessible for most people. I am a bit nervous though about this place for the future, because they are just building more and more of, it started very small, there was lots of community participation. Now I'm like less sure. So that was like me trying to not talk forever. That was my thoughts on these two different projects. Both started Derelicts. One was volunteer driven and it's gone back to what it was. Whopping Wharf is very much not what it was. And I'd say to a certain extent has been successful. So if we want, we can talk about this a little bit, like your thoughts on what success actually is in an urban space, or if you have any questions about me, or not my city, or these spaces, then feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's fascinating to see how a community can turn kind of a derelict or a brown zone or gray zone development into something that can be revitalized and useful for the community, and whether or not it's successful or simulated, something that is hopefully enjoyed by many residents and guests alike. So thank you for sharing your observations and that story. Yeah. I think we'll maybe hold off till the very end to take questions for any of our presentations, just to make sure that we have time for everybody. So you're getting a lot of praise in the chat.
Oh, thanks everybody.
So next we will turn to Brianna, who will be presenting on media origins and life as an urbanite. So Brianna, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for your 10 minutes.
All right, let me just double check to make sure that you can see my screen. Can you see it?
For me, it looks like you're trying to share something, but I don't see anything up there yet.
Okay, let me try a different way. Is it visible now?
Yep.
All right. So hello everyone, my name is Brianna, and I will be presenting on media origins with regards to life as an urbanite. So this presentation was inspired by breakout speaker Mr. Stam, and he had a presentation on cities, medias, and things. And so I'll start by putting this through your head. iPhones and newspapers. There's a lot that can be contrasted about the two. So one is digital and the other is made of paper. One has a screen and the other has ink. These differences really undermine all the two have in common, because for two items that are so separated in time from one another, they possess so many similar aspects too. So at the time they were both produced, both these products were revolutionary. They both helped people learn new information about their changing world quickly. They're both highly accessible, and many people have possessed or currently possess these technologies in their home. Although these things have a lot in common, they also take a lot of natural resources are used to produce both of these things, even though you might just think newspapers are all just trees. If you have an iPhone, I encourage you right now to take it out of the case, turn it over, and look at the manufacturing stamp. It says designed by Apple in California, assembled in China. So here is our first tie to the city. One really thoughtful point I'd like to share that Mr. Stam made is that the large manufacturing plants for iPhones reside in China, but that does not mean we've cut pollution yet. Just because the geographic location or site of a manufacturing plant may have changed, pollution still occurs. So the solution we see cannot simply just be moving plants around, but rather referring to more clean energy sources by replacing the ones that are harmful to the environment and integrating new technologies. So Apple wants to go carbon neutral, and here are some photos and ways that they're working on their plan. They have solar energy, wind turbines, and Dave the Dismantler robot, who is said to recover material from iPhone components for better use in future products. Another way that they are helping with carbon removal and a cleaner planet is by investing in forests and other nature-based solutions around the world to remove carbon from the atmosphere, such as restoring degraded savannas, which that was something I discovered recently that I thought was really cool. So now that you're aware of the process of an iPhone and what it takes to produce it, I'd like to shift gears and talk about the past. Newspapers are a dying media, and Mr. Stam referred to them as dead tree media. You can check out his book on Amazon, which is listed below. He also referred the one device he said was pretty good and useful too. So he said there's a lack of merit for reading papers. People are not connected to them because they can't retweet or repost them, and they're lifeless, literally made from a dead tree. The process of an iPhone requires many metals and other natural materials around the world, as well as wealthy engineered and underpaid assembly laborers. But truthfully, processing newspapers isn't too far off from it either. So the logging industry was massive and caused deforestation, sometimes on a nearly virgin piece of land like in Canada. The loggers would do all their cutting in the winter, so it would stay on top of the ice, and then come spring, the logs would be able to float down the river, if the water was high enough, that is. Otherwise, a log jam would occur. The process would only start there, though. There were also mills, and the wood would be shredded and then shipped to printing presses. What is important to remember today is that paper is not gone, and many still choose to use physical media today, like vinyls or music, vinyls for music or paper homework. So as an urbanite, we get media quickly, but is not cost-free to our environment. Whether a tree was cut down or smog was released from the assembly plants, our world could be cleaner. We think that natural resources means a clean production, when in reality, we see huge companies such as the ones who mine fossil fuels look more at profitable situations than the harm their techniques do in this world. So here's just some pictures of birds that got caught in six-pack rings. And I thought it was just important to show like the little difference we could make by cutting off the rings so that they wouldn't be able to choke on it. So then next, let's take a look at the way some people have began to clean the planet. So there's a new innovative piece of tech, which is pictured in the top 3 photos, that many have referred to as the world's largest air purifier. So it takes smog, and it kind of works the same way that an air purifier does, and it turns it into gemstone crystals. And then on the bottom 3 pictures are from the company 4Ocean, and they created a skimmer that finds surface plastics and collects them in a tray, which is extracted from the oceans. So what can you do to help? I'd like to give you guys all some ideas of ways you can personally help our environment to thrive. When you buy something, remember to look for labels. There's 3 at the top. The Rainforest Alliance, Non-GMO, and the Forest Stewardship Council. If you're a part of a volunteer club, organize a community cleanup or adopt a highway. Even the small collections count. That's 1 less plastic bag swallowed, 1 less bird choked, and 1 less piece of plastic in the ocean. Buy less plastic and use less plastic. Revert to reusable water bottles, containers, and packages. When given the choice, pick foods that are naturally packaged. Also, make sure to educate your friends, family, and anyone who doesn't know or doesn't care about what's happening to the environment. Show them photos like this that make them think about it, and simply look up animals hurt by litter, and that will make a big difference. Also, there's something called greenwashing. Don't be fooled by buzzwords that sound eco-friendly. Greenwashing is misleading information that companies are eco-friendly when they're really not, and they might be hurting the environment. So I'll put this in the chat after I'm done with the presentation, if you want to investigate that further. And then lastly, I just say to donate to companies that work to clean up the environment. So I hope you take away that we need to remember where our products come from. Without a printing press in a mill, we would not have newspapers, just blank papers. And without an assembly factory and Wi-Fi, we would not have iPhones, just hunks of metal in our pockets. I hope for all of you today that you do your personal personal best to be eco-friendly whenever possible. Maybe one person alone can't change the world, but one person can influence others to change and in turn impact a community and in turn society. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for those words to live by and for those really eye-opening facts and statistics. We really appreciate you bringing those ideas to share and for your willingness to present them to everyone. So thank you. And you're also getting many kudos in the chat, and I saw everybody clapping their hands. Thank you everybody for your wonderful support in these first two of 8 presentations that we're enjoying today. Up next, we're going to hear from Jackson, who is going to be presenting how cities have forged America's music. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jackson.
Hey guys. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Everybody can hear me? Okay. So this is my slideshow on how cities have forged America's music. This slideshow I'm going to be focusing mainly on jazz, but I do have a last slide that kind of goes a little bit into more modern genres. So for context, I'm going to go ahead and read this thing that I've written. It is important that everybody understands that jazz is the first of many American musical genres created by the combination of African musical trends with codified Western music brought over from Europe. So this includes jazz, blues, rock and roll, country, mainstream popular music, from stuff from the 80s to Billie Eilish today. It's all related to that stuff. We cannot have any American music without African musical trends that were brought over. So the first city I'm going to talk about is New Orleans and early jazz. So contrary to popular belief, jazz didn't really just kind of appear overnight. It actually took a couple decades to kind of solidify into its own thing and the phenomenon that we understand it as today. So to understand how that happened, I'm going to start by talking about New Orleans, which was a intense subject of colonial rule. It went from French hands to Spanish hands to French hands, and then finally to American hands, I'm pretty sure. And all the while there are people from the Caribbean coming up, and as well as enslaved Africans who were brought over in the slave trade. And so all these cultural groups are going to influence New Orleans music. But most importantly, we're going with the subject of jazz. It really goes down to Louisiana Creoles and African Americans. So the Louisiana Creole and the African American demographics were basically two completely opposite cultures of music that combined to create jazz. And so with the Louisiana Creole, you had they were educated. They learned how to read music. They learned how to write music. They learned the codes and systems of Western music. But at the same time, they kind of combined it with the New Orleans culture. Now, the African American musicians were not allowed to partake in education at the time because of the racial caste that existed in the South. So they didn't have any formal education. So they learned by ear. Now, learning by ear back then was not something that you did as often, but now, especially in the context of modern music, it's been realized as a really valuable asset to be able to learn by ear. And so they also brought things from Africa, African musical trends like improvisation, which is practically unheard of in the subject of Western music. And musical improvisation is where you have a given key that you start in, and then you use the scales and the chords of that key to create a melody as you go. And it's pretty challenging. There are also some specific sounds that weren't usually used in Western music that African Americans brought. So meet Storyville. So Storyville is this red light district in New Orleans. And this is the place where Black and Creole musicians basically met, and they played and they partied and they played for other people and basically created this little culture bubble of music. And so this is where basically this cultural melting pot that I'm talking about, this is where it started. And so you have the birth of practical improvisation, like, and it being understood as a common musical practice by other musicians. This is where ragtime piano was created, and also proto jazz, which, as it was called back then, jazz, which is a regional dialect thing, which is why it was spelled that way. And so some of the first jazz musicians come from Storyville. Buddy Bolden, Freddie Kephard was a really important leader. King Oliver was a cornet player and band leader as well. And then these last two, Jelly Roll Morton was a stride piano player, and then you had Louis Armstrong on the trumpet. And now Louis Armstrong is very, very important. He's the dude who sings What a Wonderful World, among many other classical standards. So now enter Chicago and the beginning of jazz as it kind of exists as we understand it. So with the Great Migration of the 1920s, many Black people, including the musicians that were included in that group, went up to the North to escape the intense racial segregation and discrimination that existed in the South. And so you ended up having a lot of musicians going to Chicago and playing at the South Side. And this is where Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver really got popular. And they kind of brought this sort of proto jazz to a white audience, and it began to just be exported to the rest of America. And now it's also important to remember that while this is happening, while Chicago is being just overrun by the jazz epidemic, the Harlem Renaissance is also happening in New York. So it's kind of this cultural catalyst that is helping jazz gain traction. So now we're going to talk about New York and the Harlem Renaissance with jazz. So before I talk about these two important guys, I want to clarify that from my understanding, the Harlem Renaissance did not give any specific jazz developments to the music, but rather I see it as sort of a thing that was happening culturally with African Americans at the time, and kind of created the social climate needed for jazz to really explode into this just revolutionary music trend that had never existed before. And so in New York, you have two people. You've got Duke Ellington, two most important big band leaders of all time. He learned from stride piano, so people like Jelly Roll Morton, and he gains his notoriety at Harlem. And now alongside him, you have Fletcher Henderson, who he codified jazz. He basically gave it its function. He gave all the different instruments their roles, like what does the alto sax do? What does the tenor sax do? What does the trumpet and the trombone do? And he also invented, well, not invented, but he facilitated call and response. And call and response is basically an improvisational practice where several musicians will all take turns improvising with the intent of sort of having a conversation through. So it's, in its own way, it's an artistic expression. So on the left, this is Duke Ellington, and on the right, that's Fletcher Henderson. So now I'm going to talk about some important individuals who kind of helped launch this off the ground. So first, you got Louis Armstrong, as I mentioned before. After being taught by King Oliver for an extended period of time, he moved up to Chicago, where he was mostly active. But on the brief occasion where he did go to New York, he really showed everybody how to play jazz. He started playing and showed everybody how it was done. So he kind of became the standard of jazz at the time, and his career is very long. So he set a lot of really important standards that were upheld by his contemporaries. And again, he had sort of this unmatched talent. He was what everybody wanted to be. And although some sources may disagree, Louis Armstrong is most definitely the real king of jazz. And so now you have Paul Whiteman. So this is a white guy from San Francisco. He played in the SF Symphony, and he basically approached the cultural phenomenon that was happening at the time and tried to combine jazz with written Western music. And so, he kind of helped, yes, you could say he viewed it from that angle, but and he's considered the king of jazz for what he did. Even though his music doesn't necessarily sound like jazz, he really just combined the rhythmic practices of Western music with sounds that came from African music. And that's just not what jazz is. So, and I also, it's hard to give any one white man credit for all the things that the Black populations of America contributed to jazz during its inception. So I would not consider him the king of jazz, although he is considered to be. And so next you have Count Basie. He is the other really important band leader. He's a contemporary with Duke Ellington. And he basically is the dude who brought jazz to everybody, and he brought it to the forefront of American culture in Kansas City. And he is the man who conceptualized it to people who wouldn't otherwise understand, and it became this international thing. And he also solidified the concept of swing, which is a really, really important rhythmic practice in nearly all forms of jazz. So it sets it apart from other forms of music. And so finally, I'm going to talk about Kansas City and how jazz evolved further. So in Kansas City, Missouri, this was like the next New Orleans style city. This is where all these people were playing for people who wanted to listen. There were parties going on where jazz was always present. And it kind of was just this really bright and open and loud, again, cultural phenomenon that was jazz. And so here you saw intense improvisation battles, which is basically, if anybody's ever heard of a guitar battle, it's basically this, but with jazz instruments. And so the three really important people that came from this specific era is Count Basie. As I mentioned before, he gained his traction and made his achievements in Kansas City. You have Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, who were two very important jazz sax players. They had a really specific sound. If you listen enough, you can hear them in music. You'll know, oh, that's Lester Young playing. And so what I'm trying to drive home here is that cities basically created the cultural climate needed for cultures to combine. And without that cultural combination, we could not have jazz. And because of the way that jazz created these common musical practices that were local to America for the longest time, we could not have rock and roll without that. We could not have blues as a genre without jazz. We could not have modern pop without jazz. And so I'm just going to briefly go over some other cities that kind of also were hotbeds of different types of contemporary music. So first I'm going to talk about blues. As it was taking off, Memphis was the scene for blues. Throughout the 20th century, Detroit, St. Louis, and West Coast cities were also other sites for blues. And now in the modern era, Chicago's kind of from what I understand, I could be wrong about this, but from what I understand, Chicago's kind of the place where blues flourishes now, contemporary blues. And so some miscellaneous areas, Nashville, Tennessee is where country really took off. And then Los Angeles is important for the metal scene. Megadeth, Metallica, they both came from Los Angeles. And I think Slayer came from nearby. And those are three of the big four metal bands that kind of created that whole genre. And as some you probably know, Seattle is important to the 90s scene. That's where Nirvana came from. I'm pretty sure Alice in Chains came from Seattle. Pearl Jam, maybe. I could be wrong about that. But Seattle is widely considered to be the seat of 90s rock. And then lastly, Austin, Texas is literally everything, because it's less about the fact people didn't really so much create music there as they played music for every sort of person there. Stevie Ray Vaughan was a blues revivalist from the 80s who played at the Austin City Limits. A guy from the 80s and 90s, Eric Johnson played at the Austin City Limits. I'm sure Eric Clapton played there as well. And then this year, Billie Eilish played at the Austin City Limits, where all sorts of musicians from all sorts of genres and walks of life have played before. So yeah, again, I'll just say, we could not have American music without big cities. So yeah, that's the point I'm trying to drive home. And that's the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jackson, for bringing that interesting perspective to all of us at the World Affairs Seminar. While we didn't necessarily cover music explicitly, you really found a way to tie it into how the rise of and development of cities across the United States has played into the rise of different musical genres. So thank you for sharing what you know, and obviously a passion of yours. So we will,
Thank you.
absolutely, we will go ahead and turn to our next speaker, Elijah, who is going to be presenting his talk on man and how he is changing today's cities. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it to Elijah. Elijah, I think you're muted yet. Yep.
Hey everybody, I'm Elijah. Am I now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Elijah from Uganda. So today I'm going to be sharing a little piece on generally climate and all. So just give me a second. Hold on just a little while. Okay, here we go. So basically, this is what I was able to come up with. Sorry, just I'll just leave it as is. So yeah, this is what I was able to come up with, and I looked into it, and I looked at it, and it actually looked like an interesting topic to handle. So man as he changes today's cities. So basically, you're going to look at how we continue to live in all these cities, Paris, New York, and you're like, where are we going with it if we continue to, should I say, intoxicate it, poison it, or what have you? You know, all these fumes, all the cars, as we continue to develop, you'll find out that all the fumes that we release were like kind of poisoning the environment, right? So now, which brought me to this. Not sure if you guys can still hear me.
You're good.
We can hear you.
All right. So here, on the next part, we have environmental change versus the cities. We're going to look at how all what we're doing is affecting city per city. So if you're going to look at some of the evils in today's city, we have pollution, we have nature degradation, we have under appreciation of culture. If we look at pollution, you're going to look at all the guys who are throwing out plastics, who are dumping non-biodegradable material into the lakes, into the greenhouses that we have going on and whatnot. So it actually becomes kind of a threat to the environment, seeing that all this in, like, I don't know, the next century or so, now most of the soil will be infertile, you won't be able to actually get food and what all, and it'll actually be something that actually is going to affect us a lot, because in the long run it could bring famine and all. So if you look at the nature degradation, there you're going to see like deforestation, bush burning and all, whereby you're going to cut back on the whole water cycle, the whole transpiration, the whole what, and in the end, you're going to see the whole, okay, I'm not saying that the trees are like the only source of water and all in like the whole water cycle process, but like I'm saying, one thing leads to another, right? So if by the time you connect, the whole water table have reduced and whatnot, and you know, in the end we shall see ourselves as rather a whole desert thing, right? Which wouldn't actually be fitting for us, because if we got to look at how the world is beautiful today and compare it with what it would be after all this has happened, it wouldn't be fair to like the future generation if they never got to see how all this looked like back then. So it actually hurts. It's like a double-ended sword if we actually don't look at ourselves and try to fix this problem before it actually happens. While my last point is kind of dialing back to one of the keynotes that we had earlier this week, honoring art, culture, and all. Because under appreciation of culture, you're going to have so many people fighting that no, this building is archaic, it's not going to work for us anymore, it's rather useless and whatnot. And yet it's actually pretty useful. It may not be as useful as it was back then, but the fact that it means a lot to the people of the city, I think it should actually be maybe remodeled or something, remodeled into something beautiful, like going back to Katie's presentation a while back. She talked about how things were being remodeled to serve a better purpose in society. So if we actually did that for most of these archaic buildings going on, it would do us justice rather than rather than just bulldozing them away and like putting up shopping malls, parking lots. It would actually be better if we left some of this culture to kind of remind us where we come from, what all this means to us, and instead of just living flat lives and all. Yeah. So moving on, we look at why all this is still happening. You're going to see population growth as you continue. Well, now, like, I'm not sure how it is back there, but like, if you come to Africa, it's actually a rather common thing. You're going to see a family of 10, you're going to see a family of 20. It may actually be shocking, but that's what is going on. And well, this can be controlled in countries like China, where some people have to like go off to the military if you exceed like 2 or something. Here, it's actually rather, it actually brings pride, sort of, if you have that many. But well, going back to the point, if we continue to multiply at such a fast rate, it's going to put pressure on the whole real estate place, because obviously no one is going to live like in a cell, right? As in sell. No, everyone is going to want something a bit luxurious, something a bit spacious that is going to actually accommodate them, their family, whatnot. So everyone is going to be looking at getting a rather big plot or sort, so they can actually live the good life, as I may term it. And in the long run, if everyone is doing that, by the time you reach like your 4th generation, people will be arguing over just, I don't know, half an acre or something. And we should actually leave the only resultant solution to just go clear forests, clear national parks and all. So in the end, you won't have, I don't know, Washington State Park. You won't have all those, or you won't have all those parks. You won't have all those green places in the city, which will just leave a city as, I don't know, concrete and all, pavers all the way. You won't have any place to go and look, and you're like, one of those afternoons you just settle down and all. You're going to look at also greediness. You're going to also see demand for fossil fuels. For example, some countries in Europe, they actually ban coal as a fuel to get the processing going as a source of heat. And when they do that, they actually release fumes which are like intoxicating the environment. A while back we looked at environmental science with Sam, and yeah, he actually looked deeper into this. But if you look at all this, it's actually just rather something that could happen in the next 200 years, 100, and we wouldn't actually have anywhere to live. Everyone would, the demand for air filters would be high, and obviously by then they wouldn't really be doing much. So continuing on, you're going to look at the effects on the cities altogether. Here we have the negatives, we have the positives. So we look at depopulation, we look at destruction of public property, as seen before. Because if you're going to look at depopulation, someone is going to get fed up of living in this whole, I don't know, this very squeezed environment, and is going to want to like migrate away, while others are also going to, they're going to move away if it's too squeezed, and also the reverse is true. So it would end up having, in the long run, it would just be overpopulated areas all the way around, and we didn't have anywhere else to go. So, but while all that negative is going on, there actually are some positives to this whole thing. Because if there's overpopulation, someone is going to think of, obviously the organizations like the NRDC are going to come in, they're going to, for those that don't know it, the NRDC deals with reserving these green spaces that we have going on, swamps, you name it, parks, whatever. So the NRDC is going to come and be like, are you sure there isn't any other option apart from clearing the forests and all? So someone is going to look into recreation of abandoned places, maybe to turn them into apartments. We're going to also look at vertical expansion, where people are just going to pile over the other and all. And then also increase tourism, because while we're looking at environmental change back there, here is actually, we're just looking at change in general, right? So someone is going to develop from the way the places were in the 16th century and come to look at 21st century, and people have actually developed their storied buildings, there's what. So it's actually going to be actually beneficial for us, because if you look at places like Paris, you go to Italy, you go to actually New York, like there in the States and all, people are actually going to keep on coming because people have their headquarters there. If it's international, for example, the UN, because the UN was actually an example of change. Back then, everyone was like, every man for himself, but later on we came out together, we're like, let's form a general body, and they put up the headquarters there. So like yearly, you're going to keep on having international delegates coming in, even in case the whole COVID situation goes up, we're going to have maybe a physical gathering sometime in the future. So there could be negatives, but at the same time, there are also positives, which actually helps us a lot. Yeah, and pushing forward, we look at the revenge plan. So what are we going to do now that you have this knowledge? You're not going to just sit around and be like, oh, cool. Let's just move, right? You can't just be like that and call yourself a citizen of planet Earth. You should look at it that what can I do as an individual? What can I appeal for? You could just appeal maybe to the lawmaking bodies to, criticize the people that want to only appeal to deforestation, to swamp degradation, generally nature degradation, as their last resort to find a solution to something. They want a fuel source. Their only thing is coal, trees, what? That should be like cut off. It should be like, hold on, what else do we have in store? What? Let's think ahead. Let's get a plan B, right? Then also zero tolerance policy for abuse and misuse of public property. here we are actually going to see the archaic buildings in society, because they're going to actually, because if we are actually able to manage these properly without any misuse or what, I don't know, breaking windows, what, it actually lasts longer. It doesn't tempt these bad people, should I say, from coming to be like, no, let's tear this down. What a new move. What if we actually work together as a team to keep this going on and looking good? It's actually to our benefit that this all happens smoothly and all. Yeah, and then also recycling, which most of us already do. So at least that's the good part. That's a start. It's not too bad. Yeah, and if we actually look at all of this, we could actually avoid the whole problems that we've been hearing of, global warming, which actually is pretty scary because you can't look at the whole planet being a desert and you're seated comfortably. It's actually a bit scary. So yeah, that's my pitch for today, and thank you for listening.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Elijah, for bringing those some of those human created issues to our attention. And of course, it's always the first step is just recognizing them, but it's also good to know that many of us are already doing some of the things to help mitigate and maybe reverse the impact of those negative things that are occurring. So we'll move right along to our next speaker. Elle will be giving us a presentation today. So we're really looking forward to hearing from her. So with that, I'll hand it over. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hang on. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, I'm having technical difficulties my computer's not updated apparently. Can I really quickly switch devices?
Sure, if you'd like, we can come back to you after Kailey.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you.
All right, not a problem. So Kailey, I'm gonna put you on the spot and bump you up to our next speaker. Kailey, I don't remember if you still had other folks joining you for today's presentation, but either way, Kailey will be presenting on mental health and incarceration. So we'll give you the floor.
Yeah, Fariha will also be helping with the talk. So if you want to pin her or something, yeah. But I will share my screen and then we will get going. All right. Can everyone see it okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Awesome. So we will be presenting on mental health and incarceration today. And this presentation was made by Fariha, myself, Hannah, Ian, and Nick, but Fariha and I will be presenting it to you today. So before we start, we wanted to give a quick trigger warning since we will be talking about mental health topics. So yeah, and that we will begin. So we have this quote on the screen, everything happens for a reason. And we use this quote because every person who has committed a crime has a reason for doing so. People don't just walk out of their house one day and randomly decide to commit a crime. Oftentimes, there are reasons behind it, feelings, emotions, or past experiences. This is why access to mental health resources are so important. If someone is suffering from an addiction, then they should be offered rehab instead of being put into a prison. If someone is committing domestic abuse, they should be given mental health counseling to properly regulate their emotions instead of being put into a prison and never addressing these issues. Without offering incarcerated people help, the cycle just continues. Once people are released, they go back to their old habits because they weren't taught any other options. So there are multiple other ways besides mental health resources to lower incarceration rates. As you can see from this graph by the Marshall Project, which is a journalism organization that reports on criminal justice issues, some other notable interventions that would have made a difference in incarcerated people's lives are access to affordable housing, access to affordable college, and being able to make a living wage. However, for this presentation, we'll just be focusing on mental health counseling, and which was one of the highest rated interventions that could have made a difference in incarcerated people's lives. It also is a key intervention to lower recidivism rates, which means the rate that incarcerated people are convicted again after a previous conviction. The effects of being in prison can worsen mental health conditions further, so mental health help is all the more necessary. One example of a part of prisons that can worsen mental health is solitary confinement.
Yeah, so like Kailey said, one of the most harmful parts about prison is solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is the isolation of an incarcerated person in a separate cell as punishment for their actions. The most common types of solitary confinement are disciplinary segregation and administrative segregation. Disciplinary segregation is used as a punishment for behavior and lasts days and at most weeks. Administrative segregation is used when an incarcerated person is deemed risky and harmful to others around them. They are put in solitary confinement from months to years. Unfortunately, this type of isolation is becoming increasingly used in prisons and becoming more harsh. Tens of thousands of people are put in solitary confinement for years, from 23 to 24 hours a day. This leads to anxiety, panic, insomnia, paranoia, aggression, depression, hallucinations, and other psychological effects. Anthony Graves was formerly incarcerated for a crime he did not commit and spent 10 years in solitary confinement. He told scholars that he could never sleep well and that he had constant emotional breakdowns even after being released from prison. Other long-term effects that psychologists worry about is how solitary confinement instills anxiety and fear into people affected. The people affected feel afraid of the individuals around them and feel afraid of their own actions when they are released. They become reliant on the unhealthy environment that solitary confinement forces upon them and are incapable of living in any other condition. This furthers their mental health challenges and trauma.
So the general conditions of prisons can also affect mental health. So as you can see from this graph, compared to other founding NATO countries, the United States has by far the highest incarceration rate. And in fact, it actually has the highest incarceration rate in the world. And it's the only country that's considered a developed country that is in the top 10 incarceration rates in the world. So what does this mean for people in prisons? It really affects their living conditions in the US because prisons are so overfilled, and it decreases quality of life and jeopardizes their safety. And it also limits access to meaningful programming, all of which can have an impact on incarcerated people's mental health. And last but not least, architecture of prisons is not conducive to rehabilitation. So prisons are often made of linoleum and concrete, and just being in that dull, drab environment and like in a cell, not being able to see the outside world very often or have a window to even look through can be very difficult to cope with.
And so common issues that incarcerated people deal with after release can include difficulty finding employment, finding housing, and finding and receiving public assistance like food stamps. The stress of reentering society can worsen previous mental health conditions that were left untreated. This can lead to increased recidivism rates because people fall back into old unhealthy habits.
So you may be wondering after this presentation and others throughout the week, that what can we do to help? Because this is a big problem and sometimes it feels like there's not much that you can do. Well, in your community, you could contact local representatives to communicate your interest in the issue. Their job is to know what you care about, and communicating this interest in funding more accessible mental health resources to both the community and especially incarcerated people is vital for them to do their job. It may seem like it doesn't do much, but if enough people call to discuss this issue, it will eventually be brought up. In general, you can often volunteer at local reentry organizations for incarcerated people if they exist in your area. This can help these organizations stay afloat and run smoother so that they can provide mental health support for formerly incarcerated people. A long-term goal for the US is to model what other country prison systems look like, for example, Norway. The architecture is specifically designed to create a welcoming environment that's better for incarcerated people's mental health. These prisons are built with glass, cork, and wood instead of that concrete and linoleum, and they're designed in such a way that it doesn't feel suffocating. Instead, the architecture is used to encourage rehabilitation, which is put as the center goal of these prisons. This in turn boosts mental health, and though this is a long way off in the future and will likely be expensive, it's definitely something to fight for and look forward to. And that's all we have.
Thank you both for bringing that wonderful perspective of, I shouldn't say wonderful, but that enlightening perspective of our incarceration system in the United States, and certainly, again, knowing that there is something that that we can do about it, and certainly at even your age as delegates in your community, you do have agency to make a difference. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. With that, we'll turn back to Elle. Are you with us again?
Yes, I'm back. I think it should work now.
Perfect. Well, we'll turn to you to hear what you have to say.
All right. Okay. Hi guys, I'm Elle. I live in Colorado. Today I'm going to talk about critical theory, and I'm going to use my own experience in AP research in hopes of helping show the uses of critical theory. So a couple of days ago, I finished this book, When the Emperor Was Divine. I read it for my summer homework, and I was supposed to annotate it. The assignment wasn't very specific. It told me that I needed to annotate talking points. Yeah, that's it. So at first I wasn't really sure what to look for. And then, yeah, by the time I finished this 5-chapter book, I had 8 notebook pages of annotations. A year ago, I probably wouldn't have made it to 1. So what changed? AP research is the answer to that. At the beginning of AP research, I was completely stumped. And by the time everybody else had finished their annotated bibliography, I still didn't have a topic. So I decided I was going to try and take the easy way out. And I said, okay, why don't I do a feminist analysis of a Disney movie? Then I can just, watch a movie. Should be easy, right? The joke's on me. A feminist analysis, it turns out, is just one lens of critical theory. So I ended up having to get a 500-page critical theory textbook, and I read the whole thing. So what exactly is critical theory? Critical theory examines power. Well, more specifically, critical theory examines how power works. It begins with culture, which then develops into ideology, and then that gives power to the certain groups of people who fit the ideology of the culture. So Disney was a difficult topic. It took me an entire semester to figure out a gap in the topic because that's important to AP research. So my gap, music. Music, particularly lyrics, can affect how young children and teens establish relationships and conduct themselves in social situations. Most Disney princess movies follow the structure of a musical. So I decided that I was going to examine the female solos in Disney princess movies and how they reinforce the patriarchal angel monster trope. Now, you might be thinking, why exactly Disney matters? Psychotherapists believe that most human beings form their core beliefs about the world at the age of 7. So that means at the age of 7, children decide the difference between right and wrong. The Disney princess franchise targets children around the age of about 4, or starting around the age of about 4, resulting in Disney becoming a sort of teacher on what children believe that their identity should be. Traditional gender roles portray men as strong, rational, and decisive, and women as weak, emotional, and submissive. The angel monster trope basically characterizes women who fit traditional gender roles as good and women who don't as bad. So I decided I was going to examine the solos, mixing both the lyrics and the actual music. So first I kind of started by deciding whether or not they were feminine or they were masculine or feminine. And then I looked at whether the characters were portrayed as evil or virtuous or evil and natural or unnatural. So I'm gonna explain that real quick. So when I was deciding whether they were masculine or feminine, I looked at how the lyrics portrayed the character under these specific emotional, innocent, or submissive for the angels, or rational, sexually forward, or dominant for the monsters. But then I also had to look at the vocal range and certain techniques because there are different ways that singers can make a more masculine or feminine tone of voice. For example, in Poor Unfortunate Souls, Ursula establishes that she's dominant in the line, Flotsam Jetsam, now I've got her boys, the boss is on a roll. She establishes that she's the boss, and that's typically a masculine role. But then she also establishes that her henchmen are male, which is also very threatening to patriarchal ideals. So I kind of used a similar tactic to determine whether the character was good or bad, choosing adjectives to see if the character fell under that category. So this was only in the lyrics. There was no way to really use the music. So going off the Ursula example, she kind of lies to Ariel from the very beginning, which kind of makes her devious. And so as established already, she transgresses from traditional gender roles, and it's also connoted with the fact that she is evil. So for the natural or unnatural, this is where a lot of music theory came into play. You don't really need to know how all this works if you don't already know, but basically there are different ways to create or alleviate musical tension, which is how the song is meant to make the listener feel. More musical tension is likely to make the listener feel uneasy, so the more musical tension, the less natural the portrayal of the character. Continuing with the Ursula example, there's an E minor 7th chord, which creates a sort of a musical crunch between the D and the E flat, and that adds a lot of musical tension. So Poor Unfortunate Souls kind of makes Ursula the classic monster. She deviates from traditional gender roles, and she's evil and unnatural. So basically it tells children or young girls that if they don't stick to traditional gender roles, then they're evil and wrong, I guess. So in the end, I decided that the angel monster trope is indeed present in Disney's female solos. So I feel like you're probably wondering, how does this relate to urban life? Well, over the past week, we've discussed art and culture as a large part of urban life in a changing world. Critical theory offers us all a chance to examine art and culture in ways that we previously never would have understood. Critical theory is also a way to become aware of messages being sent out and can help us make sure that we send out the message that we want to. So my research is an example of the complexities of critical theory. The feminist lens is not the only form of critical theory, and you can use it to examine how cultural works define and teach identity and how that affects society. In order to work towards a better future, we need to examine the past and present. Thank you for listening.
Wow. That was awesome.
Great job, Elle, on that fascinating perspective of really how, again, your passion in music can give us a better perspective about the world around us if we just look maybe a little bit more closely, a little bit deeper, and really examine the things that might have faded into the background for many of us. So thank you very much for that perspective. And of course, always fun to bring Disney into the mix. Next, we will ask Katto to give us a presentation. He'll be talking about how to make cities more equitable. So with that, we'll hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Hello, everyone. My name is Katto from Uganda. So I'm not really going to use slides. We're just going to talk it out. So I'm going to talk about how to make cities equitable. Now, when you look at this, when you're talking about making a city equitable, imagine a city that imagine a sustainable city where all residents have equal opportunity to thrive and prosper, and where all the health and where health is equally, should I say, equally distributed amongst all races, amongst all people of different races and ethnic backgrounds. So, to make, for when it comes to making things, there are things that you look at, things that you consider, things such as housing, things such as education, things such as food, healthcare, and finance. So let's start with housing. Now, the thing with housing is that there's what we call black market housing that limits this. Now, the thing with black market housing, there are two main problems that surface from black market housing. Number one problem being vulnerable people are subjected to living in very intolerable conditions. That's one. Two, living costs are raised, especially, this is how it is. Basically, there are those people that operate outside the government policy that requires landlords to provide a safe space, healthy space for people to live in. And those people who go against that, and they mainly prey upon the vulnerable groups of people who are desperate for any sort of shelter. So they are subjected to living in somewhat intolerable, somewhat disgusting living conditions because they have no other choice. So that's one. So that's one. So they live at low cost. They give them affordable costs, but the living conditions are terrible. They are very, very terrible. That's one. Two, since the bad living conditions are affordable, it makes the good they're affordable, so there'll be more. So the good places to live in will be very few. Demand for them will be very high. Therefore, the prices will go up. So at the end of the day, you have the good being very expensive, so few people can afford that. And what people can afford is just terrible. You'd rather live elsewhere than that. Now, the best solution for that is to, let's say, give power back to the tenants. By this, I mean, eradicate this black market system, whatever, just deal away with it. And, what governments can do is to somehow make it easy for non-code compliant people, non-compliant landlords to get caught easily, make it easy for them to get caught. And when they are caught, they should be punished like severely. So that will greatly lessen black market housing, hence increasing, the legitimate housing. First of all, living standards will go back up, and since there are very many, there's a lot of supply of that, the prices will go low. So at the end of the day, it's a win-win. Prices have been lowered, and living standards, good living standards can be affordable to all. That's housing. Number two is education. Now, education, good education is the backbone of any urban city. Any city that has any bright future, the number one thing is a good education for the youngsters, for everyone in general. So what we can do is what I say, putting the good schools in the bad neighborhoods. Like what this, like you could take, let's say, any good private, any good public school that offers free education, put it in a bad neighborhood. Now, this provides good quality education for the low-income students that wouldn't be able to afford, good education, or are not in reach of it. Like, the good school is too far away. It's brought near to them, so they can. Those children, even college students, can get proper education. Now, with once you have a good school in a community, that attracts investors. People that want to, let's say, improve roads. Those people don't build hospitals. People don't build any sort of, people that don't just build, and people just want to develop any sort of social services, which will be good for the community. And at the end of the day, we also have to protect the people that are living in those neighborhoods, because if they're not protected, remember they are vulnerable. So those rich people that are coming in to invest might want to evict them and get their land so they can do whatever they want with it. So the best thing to do is to protect them so that they can also benefit from the good that has come into their neighborhood. Then we have finance. Now, finance, this is both personal and finance for the whole city. So the basic thing, or like the main thing you could do, all that we could do, is, let's say, financial education. Just give people the basics, the difference between assets and liabilities. Could teach people how to make passive income. Could teach people how to invest in IRAs, how to invest in stocks, bonds, dividends, all that. Even invest in real estate. Could also teach people how to do things properly. So now, take the basic example: somebody wants to buy a car. If somebody wants to buy a car, let's say worth $30,000, I could save $2,000 for 2 years. That will get me my $48,000. Then buy my car, remain with $18,000. Now that's 2 years to do that. Now, instead of going ahead and buying that car, what I could do, or what you could teach anybody to do, is to get that $48,000, get that $48,000 and invest it in an asset that appreciates over time. Let's say if you invest in real estate, let's say you can buy real estate worth $40,000. Now out of $40,000, you spent like 2 years saving up for it, and you spend another 2 years, for that you invested in your asset that appreciates over time. Let's say real estate. You can appreciate for the next 2 years. So you spend a total of 4 years. Now, after appreciating, you could even sell that same piece of real estate for maybe around $100,000 to $150,000, maybe. You don't ever know. So the day you have a lot left over. So you could, let's say, if you want, you could buy your car worth $40,000. Let's say if you sold your thing for worth $120,000, you could buy your car for worth $40,000. Then you have $80,000 left over. So you could also reinvest that into real estate. At the end of the day, you have two things. You have your car and real estate that just keeps on going up, instead of you just going and buying a car and remaining with nothing, but just a car that will keep on depreciating. That's finance. Then you have food. For any city, number one thing is food. Food, because people have to eat. But sadly, around 26 million Americans and I think more than 23 million Ugandans are experiencing some sort of hunger throughout the year. Now, this is some sort of hunger and malnutrition throughout the year. This is caused by the number one, scarcity in the food, and even the food that might be there might not be that nutritious. It might not be necessary for what people need. So the best thing to do that, like for us here in Uganda, we have what we call society markets, where, like, let's say once in a while or every Saturday, farmers from all over the place just gather, bring all their produce, good quality stuff, bring all their produce, bring everything, and just put it there at affordable prices. So at the end of the day, anybody and anyone can walk in there with any amount of money and live with good quality food, a reasonable amount of good quality food at the end of the day. Then you could also encourage the sale of local foods and also encourage, farming councils. You could also invest in agriculture. Then you have health. The main thing with health is that it's expensive. And for this reason, only a few people who are rich can afford what's necessary for them to recover, leaving our low-income guys to more or less die. At the end of the day, what we could do, and what hikes these prices? There are things such as, you have high administrative costs, then you have unnecessary yet costly lab tests, then sometimes you also have unregulated drug prices, then you have sometimes patients are only allowed to get a few insurance companies, from a few insurance companies. So the solution to all that? Well, number one, figure out a way of lowering, let's say, administration costs. Unfortunately, I haven't really come up with any way of lowering those costs because, well, after looking at it, healthcare is quite expensive and necessary the way it is. But then what you could do is allow people to get health insurance from all sorts of companies that that charge lower insurance rates. Therefore, anybody and anyone at any financial level, you could get yourself some good healthcare. And number two, the solution, limiting unnecessary tests. There are some tests, all tests are costly, most tests are costly, but sometimes that doesn't mean that most of the times they're not that necessary. At the end of the day, they've been done, so they've increased the cost. What you could do, let's say doctors should be keen to know that this is not necessary. You don't really need a test for that. So if doctors are alert and figure out what is what, which test is necessary and which isn't, you could lower the costs. So you lower the hospital bill. So that makes it easier for anybody to go into a hospital and get the treatment that they need. Then lastly, you have livelihood. Now, livelihood, I mean, how you earn a living, your job, what you do for work, how you get by. There are very many ways in which you can get livelihood, though in some cities it's not all that good, because sometimes maybe it's for those who go to college, and those who do what's unnecessary. Like, let's say somebody could get let's say a degree in maybe music, a degree in art. End of the day, the job, I'm basing on your US statistics. End of the day, there aren't so many jobs, and the jobs are not really growing. Actually, it's even just reducing. So if, let's say, you could encourage, you should just inform someone who's going into college, has got the opportunity to go into college, to do what's necessary, to go for a course that is in demand. Things such as engineering, medicine, data science, software engineering, and all that, finance management, business administration at a consulting level, all that, do what's necessary. Then I remember Sean Wilson told us that where in a correctional facility, they would give them vocational skills, so carpentry, teach them how to fix cars. End of the day, all that help when the prisoners got out, they use those skills to earn a living. So you will also put up some sort of programs that facilitate and encourage all that. So whereby, let's say, those that are interested, you could get, let's say, maybe teenagers during summer, instead of just wasting time partying and all that, they could go for those things. So at the end of the day, they have an extra skill. You never know what life brings. You never know that skill might be your main source of livelihood. And also, you could also hone talents and promote talents. Let's say if someone was born to race, like Lewis Hamilton, such guys who are born to race, instead of taking such a person to school, you could get them into what they love at an early age, so they can perfect it. By the time they reach the age that are allowed to do it, they're already perfect and they can go and do it. Then lastly, that's it. Livelihood, basically, your vocational skills, improving talents, and going to school and learning what is necessary and what is highly demanded for. So yeah, that's it. That's basically the end of my presentation. Hope you liked it. If you have any questions, you can ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katto, for that amazing presentation. We've talked a lot this week about equity and trying to find a way to make our cities more equitable. And so you provided some really concrete examples of how through housing, education, finance, food, health, and livelihood, we can hopefully accomplish that in each of our own cities. So last but not least, we'll hear from Serene, who is going to make a presentation on designing cities to be more people-friendly and environmentally sustainable. So we'll turn to Serene for our final presentation.
All right. So let me present my screen. Oh, guys, see what I'm presenting?
There it is. We can see it now.
Oops. All right. Well, today I'm going to try to make this short. So basically, I'm just going to be talking about how we can make cities more eco-friendly while keeping them beneficial for residents, and that the two aren't things that are conversely opposed. So I'm going to talk pretty broadly about this because you could talk for hours about like any very, very specific about it. So the first part of this topic is using nature in architecture in urban areas and like installing natural elements into your cityscapes. So like this picture right here on the right side is Hotel Park Royal in Singapore, which is very famous for this gorgeous, gorgeous architecture and their natural terrace garden. All right, so one of the first things that we're going to be talking about are the health benefits of having more natural installations within cities. So first of all, there are of course mental health benefits of being around nature. There are countless studies on it, but in general, spending time around trees and looking at trees reduces your stress, lowers your blood pressure, and improves your mood. There are so many studies talking about how beneficial it is to just be around nature and have access to forests and trees and foliage instead of being in a bare concrete city. So some other health benefits include the fact that natural installations absorb pollution and basically act as natural air filters. And a study from the universities of Birmingham and Lancaster found that using green walls especially on the sides of highways or roadways, could reduce pollution in urban areas by as much as 30%, and that they were able to remove 40% of nitrogen oxides and 60% of particulate matter from the surrounding air. The DECNY also explains that exposure to forests boosts our immune system, and because plants actually emit a certain chemical called phytoncides, which are the chemicals that plants produce to protect themselves from insects. And when we breathe those in, they basically boost our immune system and help us produce NK cells, which help us fight off disease. So there are countless health benefits to just being around nature, and installing these installations in cities would be greatly beneficial for our residents' health, as opposed to the many diseases and risks of cancer from the high levels of air pollution within cities. So some environmental benefits and benefits to the city itself. One of the greatest boons of using green architecture, especially green roofs on the tops of buildings, is the lowering of temperatures within cities. So especially with climate change, we know that the earth is getting hotter, and urban areas already have to deal with a situation called the urban heat island effect, whereby because of the lack of natural space and the lack of trees and fresh air and plants to absorb the sun's heat, the urban areas just turn into like ovens, essentially, with all the concrete and glass and reflecting areas. So adding green roofs can absorb some of those heat and even UV radiation from the sun, which will reduce costs for heating and cooling these massive buildings, which means reduced emissions and reduced costs for residents. So green roofs also have a rainwater catchment system oftentimes, which is then used to water and maintain the plants, which is great, meaning because we don't have to install super complicated irrigation system in all these types of buildings. And it's great for especially rainy areas for absorbing that rain that can pose risks to flooding these cities. So gardens can also act as a way for residents to grow their own food organically, creating a community sentiment between neighbors and contributing to maintaining biodiversity. In many cities like Spain, they are constructing vertical gardens on terraces where they're trying to relocate and plant natural and native plants to sort of reinstate the already present natural biodiversity that used to exist where the city is now, and really bring back some of that gorgeous flora and fauna that live in areas and have been unfortunately made pretty much or have been put at risk by the existence of cities. All right, so these are some examples of some amazing green architecture. To the left, there's a building in Singapore with a vertical garden and terraces. To the right, we have these green walls, which are being popularized in the UK. These are often built on the sides of busy streets, and there are many proposals of building them along highways where we usually have those big, ugly concrete walls. And essentially, they're acting as big air filters and absorbing all the air pollution from the cars. And on the bottom is something super interesting. This is a building in Copenhagen, which is actually a waste production or a waste filtration plant that takes waste and essentially converts it to clean fuel. And on the top of this building is a huge, huge green roof that is actually the world's largest rooftop skiing slope. So basically, when it snows, all the snow accumulates and people come up and ski on this building, and it's just super cool and a lovely installation because Copenhagen has been popularizing green roofs, and it's a very cool thing for them to do. So the other branch of this that I'm going to be talking about is transportation and the environment in the city. So especially with the use of cars and public transportation and accessibility in the city. So one of the most notable things in American cities that we've been talking about a lot this week is how important cars are to cities, and how basically due to lobbying and just like the timeline of the construction of American cities, we've basically been made super reliant on all these cars. And these cars are is essentially one of the largest carbon footprints that we have in this world. And trying to lower that carbon footprint as much as possible is essential in this. So investing in public transportation infrastructure is absolutely critical. So one of these things that I personally got really excited about was when the American Jobs Plan was calling for a $621 billion transportation investment over an 8-year time frame, which God, I have no idea how that's going to work or what we're going to end up getting. But it basically we just need to remember that any investment is really, really necessary to try to improve what we already have, or just trying to fix things that already exist, like how in LA they had that huge subway system underground that's been basically abandoned. So revitalizing that, and also revitalizing things like the Amtrak system, which they're proposing a huge expansion on, which could really help change minds on and change your perspective on how to get around, how to travel cross country, and things like that. And another interesting thing is replacing specifically cars in cities. So a great example of that was in Copenhagen again, where 62% of the residents actually commute and go everywhere via bike. And how they achieved that was converting most of their infrastructure to really heavily support bikers. So they made sure that there were protected roadways and paths all across the city and bridges for these bikers. They have been designing buildings that are bike friendly, so like residential buildings that are built like in a sloped manner so that you can bike up and down them, and bike parks. And they've also really heavily taxed owning cars, which has also resulted in an affordable market for for hybrid cars. and which has also been super interesting. So so when you go to Copenhagen, you'll see a lot of Teslas and Priuses and all these different types of really cool hybrid and electric cars. So, okay, see, one of the most interesting things I also looked into was just how the use of urban planning can achieve all of this in the simplest of ways. So this video is going to explain something called a superblock. So a superblock is essentially an urban planning design which creates these huge city blocks out of many smaller city blocks within cities. So let me use the video because it can explain it better than I can.
Sure.
All right, can you guys hear this?
Water, and that's so
All right, can we hear this? Yes, no, maybe so.
It's a bit quiet.
Sorry, again?
Way to change that, to give space back to pedestrians and bicyclists, and to make cities more friendly to life outside of a car. It turns out Barcelona might have a solution. In 2014, the city was faced with serious air pollution problems. Barcelona and its 35 surrounding municipalities consistently failed to meet the EU's air quality targets. And studies were showing that air pollution in the region was causing 3,500 premature deaths every year. Traffic in the city also causes severe noise pollution. So the city developed an extensive urban mobility plan with the hope of reducing traffic by 21%. The coolest part of the plan were these things. They call them superillas. Superillas? Sí, superillas. That translates to superblocks. It's this urban design concept intended to minimize the presence of cars in city centers. The word superblock has been used before to describe huge city blocks without any passageways for cars, but that's not what's happening here. So here's how Barcelona's plan works. You take 9 square city blocks and you close off the inside to through traffic, so buses and big freight trucks, or any vehicles that are trying to get from one part of town to the next, have to drive around the perimeter. Inside the super block, the speed limit is kept to 10 kilometers per hour. That translates to just over 6 miles per hour. And curbside parking is replaced by underground parking. And that means you wind up with street space for markets and outdoor games and events.
within this 9 square block perimeter, you're going to have kind of a pleasant streetscape where people can walk around and mingle and do things without this kind of constant fear of cars around.
The concept is going to be tested out in 5 neighborhoods, but the city has identified 120 possible intersections throughout the region where it could be implemented. So how do we know what the results of this kind of plan would look like? Well, northwest of Barcelona is a city called Vitoria-Gasteiz, which has implemented superblock designs since 2008. In the main superblock at the city center, pedestrian space increased from 45% of the total surface area to 74%. And with so much less traffic, noise levels dropped from 66.5 decibels to 61 decibels. Most impressive of all, there was a 42% reduction in nitrogen oxide emissions and a 38% reduction in particle pollution in the area. And on top of that, business is up.
What you consistently see when people change their streetscapes to prioritize human beings over cars is you don't see any decline in economic activity. You see the opposite. You get more people walking and cycling around more slowly, stopping more often, patronizing businesses more. And that kind of that center of social activity will tend to build itself.
So here's the...
All right, did we actually get to see that? I hope so.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, essentially, this is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about, but I was really inspired by this because what these super blocks do is they create like a multi-dimensional like layers and layers of benefits, because not only do these super blocks act as really super convenient ways for city dwellers to get around and to benefit from their space, like we've talked about a lot, creating a safer space for pedestrians to walk around without fear of getting hurt by cars, and creating really a more easier environment to access local shops and grocery stores and create more pedestrian space, which we've talked about a lot this week. And within that, they also taught superblocks in further research also really encourage the planting of green spaces within like the building of parks, and it also reduces, as it said, reduces traffic and further usage of cars, because instead of driving the 5 minutes that you might have done before, you can now walk through or bike through these plazas. So I think that's the end of my presentation, but in general, I just wanted to share the whole idea and some really cool developments that I personally learned about and found super interesting about how we can build our cities to be more sustainable and eco-friendly and reap the benefits in more ways than one. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Serene, for another fascinating proposal and idea on how we can continue to improve upon our cities and our own communities based on examples that are already taking place around the globe. Let's put our hands together for Serene, as well as for Katie and Brianna and Jackson and Elijah and Elle and Kailey and Fariha and Katto, all who have done a wonderful, amazing job at presenting and sharing new ideas with you all. It's been a fascinating week, and this is certainly a great way to kind of round it out in hearing from you all and about your passions and interests. We have one more session this week that will happen tomorrow morning, and I hope you all are able to join us. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time, we will finish out the 2021 World Affairs Seminar with the closing ceremony, with a few remarks from our academic dean, Mike Carrier, a few from me, and a few from our facilitators, but then we'll once again turn it to you all to really give the last words of the seminar. So I think you'll really be happy with what we have in store. So having gone a few minutes over today, I'll say thank you again and have a wonderful afternoon. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning.